All right, here we are with the 5 sheet today. This one from the Huffington Post. Remember, the 5 sheet is a free open source tool which anybody can use to analyze a news article, cut through any of the fakery they might throw at you. Because this day and age, the news is not what it used to be, and we as citizens can no longer rely on the news to deliver the news. So we have to do a little bit of work on our end to decipher everything in there. And this 5 sheet is just a handy little cheat sheet to help cut through a lot of the misleading information they're going to throw at us, cut through some of the commonly used tactics these guys have. So let's get started. We will look at the headline as they write it. Some in the GOP parrot far right talk of a coming civil war. So, what is that? Is that a fact or opinion? I think that's an opinion. If you first glance at it, it might seem kind of like a factual statement, but if we dig into it a bit, so this talk of a coming civil war, they're describing that whole concept of talk as a far right talking point. But I think that's quite debatable. There are people outside of the far right who talk of a coming civil war, including, for example, this article. That's a big point of this article, is that we're getting down. This looks a lot like the lead up to the first Civil War. So I think that is clearly a piece of editorialization. All right, that's why it's an opinion. They also have this little subtitle: Warlike imagery is spreading in Republican circles post Capitol riots. Democrats believe it isn't an accident. All right. How did I paraphrase their main title? Some elected Republicans repeat far right claims of a coming civil war. Let's get started here. So, what's the known bias of the Huffington Post? I said it's left. You might call them establishment left, the same place you'd put like a CNN or an MSNBC, New York Times, one of those corporate, Wall Street Democrats, pro military industrial complex. Historically, they've been a bit more of the fringe left, a bit more aligned with the true progressives, but I think that is chipping away. They're getting more and more in lockstep with just the standard Democratic Party. Less of the Bernie Sanders, more of the Joe Biden. But for now, I left it just straight left. Alright. And remember, the 5 sheet, you fill it out based on your own beliefs and biases. So if you were to fill out this same article, you might do that differently. Let's find the thesis. It's in this first paragraph. Warlike imagery has begun spreading in Republican circles after the attack on the U.S. Capitol by a mob of President Donald Trump supporters. And then I think this second clause here is what we consider the thesis. With some elected officials and party leaders rejecting pleas to tone down rhetoric calling for a second civil war. So that too, I said, is an opinion as opposed to a fact. Why is that? So, is there rhetoric in the first place calling for a civil war? That's a debatable fact. Are they actually rejecting pleas to tone that down? Again, that's debatable. So this is not cut and dry. They didn't say the Dow Jones went up by 4.7%. This isn't a disprovable statement of fact. These are arguable points. That's why we have it listed as opinion. I paraphrased it as Some elected GOP officials are rejecting calls to tone down rhetoric calling for a second civil war. Alright, let's look next at the evidence they have supporting that thesis. So, the chairman of a county level GOP group, so this is very low level, he was forced to resign after refusing to take down a post asking followers to, quote, prepare for war. And it didn't specifically say whether or not he was the one who made the post, but the way they were evasive about it leads me to believe that he did not make the post, that he just allowed it to remain up. And this doesn't call for war, it tells them to prepare for war. Maybe if you think the other side is about to start killing you, you need to be ready for war. So that's a little different from the claim of calling for a second civil war. Right, because we see the thesis is a little different from the title. We see talk of a coming civil war in the title, and then we see calling for a second civil war in the thesis. So those are different claims. The evidence supporting the thesis would be evidence supporting a call for the Civil War. Anytime the title and the thesis are out of sync with each other, that's a deceptive tactic, of course, so keep that in mind. Alright, let's look at the next piece of evidence. 2 state-level GOP people joined a social media site, quote, where the possibility of civil war is a topic. Now I know this is not very strong evidence for the proposition that these people are calling for a second civil war. The fact that they joined a social media site with the possibility of a civil war is a topic. But these 4 bullet points I have here are, from my reading, the strongest pieces of evidence they have supporting that thesis. So, number 3, a GOP bureaucrat posted on Facebook, "The war has begun. Citizens take arms. Drum roll, please. Civil war or no civil war?" So, that's maybe the strongest piece, but keep in mind a couple of limitations here. Number 1, he's not calling for a second civil war. The way he's characterizing it, the war has already begun. And then he's also not a member of government. This man is just a member of the party. He's a party official. He's not, he has no state power. So, couple limitations on that piece of evidence. And the final one, a state assemblyman in California said, assemblyman, that's, California has 2 legislative bodies. The assembly is the lower house. It's like the members of the House in the federal government versus the Senate. So he said, "This is Lexington and Concord. First shots fired against tyranny. Tyranny will follow in the aftermath of the Biden swear-in on January 20th. And then he backtracked on that statement. They didn't specify exactly how he backtracked, but they used that word, backtracked. So that is kind of... It doesn't sound like he's directly calling for a civil war, but that's some inflammatory rhetoric there. Alright, let's keep moving on. What was the overall outline of this article? What were the major beats? So they start out saying the GOP, or some people affiliated with the GOP, are saying inflammatory things, similar to what Democrats were saying after the whole George Floyd scenario. Now, it is similar to a lead up to the Civil War. Keep in mind, it's a far right talk of a coming civil war, and that's half this article. Is there are parallels between now and the run up to the Civil War, and they have this, academic expert, and they boom, boom, boom. So they spend half the article parroting a far right talk of a coming civil war. That's what they're doing here. And then at the very end, they're saying this isn't over. I think we can see how well organized the right wing militia groups have become and how well armed they are, and that makes for an extremely explosive situation. I don't know if that will be war in the technical sense, but there could be extended period of violent attacks. That's kind of the takeaway. Uh, and I'm not sure what she means here. I think we can see how well organized the right wing militia groups. It seems to be implying that it was after the Capitol, after the storming of the Capitol, and that did not seem well organized to me. I haven't seen reporting on the fact that that was perpetrated by militia groups. And not many of those people were armed, it seems. Certainly didn't use the guns. Alright. Let's move on to the named deception tactics. Any of the ones on this list here, these are really common deception tactics that you see in these printed news articles. First one I saw in this article was poison the well. That's where, before you discuss a source of information or an individual or an entity or something, or even an event, before you give the reader enough information to make up their own mind about it, you tell them how to feel about it. You put the conclusion before the evidence. So that way, when the reader looks at the evidence, they're seeing it through a colored lens. They're not able to analyze it objectively. So here, the first paragraph described the elected GOP officials, quote, calling for a second civil war. And then all the examples provided fell well short of that. Remember, we went through the 4 strongest examples they had. I don't think any of these were calling for a second civil war. But if you're a loyal Huffington Post reader and you get primed with that in the first paragraph, then you're reading all that stuff that's, roughly on point with what they're talking about. It's in the same genre. It's talking about internal conflict. Then you'll go along, oh God, those guys did call for a second civil war. And on that point, they have this quote from Maxine Waters, which, if you had done a similar priming, it could be read just the same way. So if you said, Maxine Waters called for civil war by painting the other side as an existential threat, and then read this quote, since his first day in office, this president has spent 4 years abusing his power, lying, embracing authoritarianism, and radicalizing his supporters against democracy. This corruption poisoned the minds of his supporters, inciting them to willingly join with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and paramilitary extremists in a siege of the United States Capitol building, the very seat of American democracy. That would work just as well as any of these 4 pieces of evidence if you poison the well in a similar way. Set it up. Alright, next one is the straw man feigning ignorance. That's where you leave out an important piece of evidence or an important argument that would run counter to your narrative. So, first one here, they have this quote. Then, on January 6th, demonstrators, stoked by Trump's false claims that he won the 2020 election, blah, 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 the sentence continues. So that implies that Trump disputing the electoral result is the only reason people stormed the Capitol. But certainly there were other factors at play. No big, complicated event involving this many people is fueled by just one motivating factor. So, what else could have lessened their anger? Well, a more transparent electoral process, like, the ability to audit, uh, courts willing to hear the cases, especially Supreme Court when one state sues another and they refuse to even hear the case. Mainstream media willing to do some investigative reporting or at least take the claim seriously and not mock anyone who has questions about election integrity. Any of those things would have lessened the anger of the people who stormed the Capitol. But the way this is written implies that the only reason those people stormed the Capitol was because of Trump's claims. All right. They have this other one. This is by the academic who's talking about the Civil War and the parallels between then and now. At the time of the Civil War, this took the form of Southern white men angry at the idea that the federal government would interfere with their right to own black slaves. Today, I think this takes the form of white people who believe that black and brown people are making gains or getting special treatment at their expense. Now, some people think it has to do with blaming America's problems on white anger. That is a very common refrain I hear from people on the right. It's exactly arguments like this. It's lines like this. It's this type of rhetoric that is fueling a lot of the anger. They don't mind if other people are doing well, regardless of what color they are. It's when these institutionalists are just blaming all of America's problems on your racist anger. So that felt like something that could have been mentioned, but as a straw man, they left that inconvenient argument out. And another one here, they had this quote: "The killing of George Floyd, a black man, by a white police officer." So, if you'll remember in that case, the coroner found that the amount of fentanyl in his system would have killed him regardless of what the police did. Now, people might argue that the coroner lied or there's some reason why it's still accurate to say that the police killed him that there's still some way to make that claim. But the fact that they didn't even mention that overdose is very telling. That's not exactly a straw man, that's the feigning ignorance. They're just leaving out a material fact. A very material fact, that story. Alright, moving on to the final section here. What are the other big picture things? What was the article trying to convey? What other newsworthy facts were presented? So I think the main piece of falseness in this article was describing the comments by GOP members about whatever weird times we're living in, which are similar to the comments made by many Democrats and similar to the claims made in this very article as quote-unquote calling for war. That's the heart of the falsity in this article. Is they said these GOP people are calling for war, and this is their evidence, which is paper thin, and this is the type of rhetoric that is very much in line with what the Democrats are saying, and even what the writers of this article are saying. So that's the backbone of the lie of this article. All right, and then one other note, one other lie they had. This is the quote. Then Attorney General William Barr said the Justice Department could find no evidence of widespread fraud that would have changed the election's outcome. So that's, misleading / lying. He said at this point he had found no blah blah blah. The rest of it was mostly accurate. And at that point, the DOJ had not investigated election fraud. And I think it still hasn't. I don't know. Maybe they've done some kind of probe. But the phrasing implies that they looked into it and found nothing. The Justice Department could find no evidence. What actually happened was that they didn't look and didn't find anything. Well, there had been no investigation, and they're like, oh, have we seen election fraud? Well, no, not us. We're not looking for election. We haven't seen anything. Why would have we? And the way he said it was, terrible phrasing. A lot of people on the right were criticizing Barr for that. It wasn't long after this that Trump asked for his resignation. But he certainly didn't say that the Justice Department was unable to find evidence of widespread fraud. He was just saying up to that point, they had not yet found enough evidence of widespread voter fraud that it would have changed the election's outcome. And that was without them even investigating it. That was just based on the claims that were rolling in, that people were just reporting claims to them. Okay, well, that's what I got for this one. If you guys think I missed anything, feel free to drop a comment below. And if you would like me to do a different article, go ahead and make a suggestion. Thanks a lot, guys. I will see you next time.